I'm Alan Johnson, KU2Y, and this is the CubeSatSim assembly video, step 8, part 2. We're going to put the frame together, we're going to attach the solar panels, and we're going to put the board stack inside it. Now, there's a couple of different ways that we're going to use to attach the solar panels to the frame. One option is to use double stick tape. These are two different versions of it, but they're basically sticky on both sides. This is good for fairly permanent mounting of the solar panels. You can remove them, but it's a little bit difficult, and you can only stick them and unstick them a couple of times before it loses it. The other way to do it is to use Velcro or hook and loop tape. And this is good for solar panels that you want to be able to take apart. And there's 4 of them that it's a good idea, I think, to use the Velcro for in case you want to disassemble the frame in the future. But I wouldn't recommend doing all the solar panels because it just doesn't stay quite as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we're going to do is this is the top and the bottom pieces of the frame, and we're going to press the M3 nuts into these recesses here. So here is one of the nylon M3 nuts. Sometimes you can just do this with your fingers. You can just line it up and push them. This frame is a little bit stiff. Doesn't quite want to go in there. So you may need some needle nose pliers to basically just give it a squeeze and put them in. So there you go. There's the first one. And we're going to do this. There's 4 of them on the top and 4 of them on the bottom. And the nice thing is once we do this, the screws hopefully will not fall out on us, and it'll make it easier to assemble the frame. Get it lined up here. Okay. And the top and the bottom are identical. We'll just choose one. Okay. And then the last one here. Again, your frame, depending on how it's printed, these might be tighter or they might be looser. There we go. Okay, so we have all 8 nuts pressed in, ready to go. Now let's start with the top and the bottom. So you need to pay attention to the way these are aligned. You can do that based on the 2 holes. So I'm putting both of the holes that way, and also I'm putting it so that the outside is facing up. and I will take two of the solar panels. And these solar panels, they already have the JST connector with the red wire going to the plus, the black to the minus, and there's also some glue there to act as strain relief. So these two solar panels are going to go on there like that. And again, I could use the Velcro to attach these. I could use this roll. I'm going to use these pieces here, and I'm just going to use some scissors to cut them up here. And I'm going to put a piece there, 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 and there. So I'm just going to cut fairly thin strips. Cut four of them there. And so I'm going to peel the white side and stick it down. Okay, so they're stuck on there. Just double check they're in the right place. Ready to go. Now I need to peel the top layer here. Sometimes for this, sometimes you can do it using your fingernail, or possibly a very fine flathead screwdriver or a blade. For instance, a blade like this, you can get it in there and hold it down so that you don't peel it off. Sometimes it can be a little fiddly. Okay, so now we are ready to go. So I'm gonna put the JST wire here through it so it's on the inside. And then I'm just gonna line it up here, try to center it, and then push down. Do the same thing for the other one here. Okay, so there we go. So that is the top and the bottom with the wires to the inside being where the nuts are. All right. So now we're going to pick one of these as the top and one as the bottom. So I'll make this one the top, put it up to the side here. And here is my bottom. So I will put it here facing up. I will take my board stack from before. So this is my board stack that I put together with the spacers. I've already plugged in the USB card, and I've also done the JST jumpers here. So I'm going to put this upside down here. And so the pi 0 is facing up, and that it's on the top there. And so this is how I'm going to do it, like this. And so as long as we have it lined up here correctly with the two holes on this side, if I just lay it like that, that should line up. And that looks good. So I'm going to take 4 of these M2.5 screws, and I will put them through the frame here to secure it. Go. And again, just making sure that the JST cable is inside. And that is, and actually I'm going to make sure that it comes straight out this side over here. And I'm not fully tightening these screws yet until I get all of them started. So if I put all 4 of them in. Okay, so now I can nip them up a little bit here. Very good. So that's how it looks on the bottom. And if I flip it around here, here it is. Now, I did not pay attention to the routing of the ribbon cable here, which I should have done. So I'm going to take care of that now. Basically, I want the ribbon cable to come out the same side here as the USB cable. So I can still fix this here if I just tilt this sideways. The other thing is when it comes up, I want it to, for the camera, this is the top and this is the bottom of the camera. And obviously it's going to face outside. So I want it to be like this. So I'm just going to feed it through here. And you notice that that results in a slight twist to the cable, but that's fine. There, you can see it in there. And now it's going to come out here and face upwards like that. Okay, so that looks good. So I fixed my mistake there by feeding it through. So from now on, I just want to make sure that the camera always sits over that way. Okay, so the camera side is the first side that we're going to attach the side. So there's 2 side pieces, and I'm going to choose the one that has the camera mounts on it. And this frame actually has an up and down, and so this is the top side here with the screws there, and then the bottom is here. So when I put that on here, if I flip that around, it's going to go like this here. So the bottom is facing the frame, the top is facing away. And now I just need to twist this so that it comes out that way. So basically I'm going to be mounting the camera like that. And you notice that there are 4 holes in the frame and 4 holes in the camera. You really only need 2 screws. And also, if you do all 4 of them, these top 2 here, you can't undo without removing the solar panel. So I recommend just putting in the 2 screws and the 2 nuts. So I have my 2 M2 screws and M2 nuts. These are quite small and fiddly, so take your time when you're doing this. So I'm going to poke the screw through. Here, so there it is. And now I'm going to mount that there. And let's see if I can start the nut here with my fingers. Oh, look at that, that went on nicely. Okay, so you see how that is started on there. I'll just closer to the camera so you can see. So far, I just have the one screw there. And all the while, got to be careful not have this pull on the Pi Zero because it might become unseated if we do that. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing with the other side here. So I'm going to put the second screw in, and you can tell that looks right because the camera is centered in the square here. There it is. And start the nut. There we go. So that's both of the nuts started. And now I need my small Phillips screwdriver here in order to tighten them. So I put my finger on it so the nut can't spin. And then I tighten it here. Do one and then the other. Nip them both up here. Okay. It's pretty good. So that is no longer loose. And you can see, I'll get the angle here so you can clearly see. There you go. You can clearly see the camera centered there. And again, I'm only doing these 2 screws. You can do those 4, but you really don't need to. And the solar panel is going to come all the way down like this. So it will cover that one up. Okay. So we are in good shape here with the camera. And so now we can raise this frame here. And if we just make sure the USB cable doesn't get jammed there. Push this down here. And see how that's lined up there. And if I put the screw in there, it should go onto the nut. Start over on this side here, putting the M3 nylon screws. Get in here. And there it goes. Now that just started on the nut. I'm not going to tighten it because I want to be able to move these around a little bit as I'm putting the frame together. And you got to push it into place a little bit here. Actually, I think the nut popped out. There we go. That's what happened. There it is. So I'm going to put it back in place here and try tightening it. Actually, I think I'm going to need to repress it with the pliers here. So let's do that. Put the nut in place. Press it back in. And now see if we can start it. There it goes. Okay. So now if we look at the back there, let's see nut there, and there it is on that side. And it's not tight so that I can move it around a little bit here. And just make sure that the camera cable hooking out a little bit there, but that's all right. Okay. So that's good. We have done this is the minus X side here. The X side is the side with the push buttons and the remove before flight switch. The minus X side is here with the camera. These will also go inside there. That won't be a problem. Okay. So now we're going to spin it around. And we will do the other side here. We'll need two of the M3 nylon screws. And just going to have to feed this. If you don't have this tag attached, it makes it a bit easier, but in my case, it's attached. So I just need to feed that through, line it up. That looks good. Don't think these nuts have fallen out, so if I just put the screw in and tighten it up. There we go. And do the same thing on this side here. Just a couple of turns until it's attached. There we go. So this is the plus X side here. All right. So far, so good here. So we've got 3 out of the 4 frame pieces connected. Now let's mount some more solar panels. So let's do the plus X side here. So we're going to put 2 solar panels on it, and they're going to go basically like this. We want them pretty close together, but not so close that we block the LEDs or the switches there. And if you do them up all the way, you see here how it's basically flush with the bottom part of the frame there. Okay. So we're going to do these 2 frames, these 2 solar panels here. Again, I'm going to cut 4 more pieces of double stick tape. So I'm just going to cut thin strips here. And then I'm going to stick them on. And I'm just going to put them on the side frame here. So I'm not going to put it on the bottom, because otherwise when we disassemble it, the frame will be stuck together. So 4 pieces here. Okay. And now I want to peel the top of the film off here. Okay. And one more. Okay. Now, as I do these, I want to, again, make sure that the JST cable here feeds inside. So I'm going to poke it through this one here, and I want it to just basically go all the way to the top like that. Okay. And now I line this up and stick it on there. And do the same for top one here. So I'm going to feed JST cable there. Now, sometimes this glue hits the frame, in which case you might have to just move it up a little bit, or sometimes you can, if you use less glue than this, it's actually better. Oops, don't want it to stick till you're ready. Yeah. Look. Oops. There we go. Straighten it a bit. Okay. So there you have it, these two sides and the 2 JST connectors going up here. Eventually they're going to plug in right there. All right, let's do the same thing for the -X side here with the camera on it. So I'm going to take 2 more of these solar panels, and I'm going to cut 4 more strips here. And again, I'm only going to put the strips onto the side frame. I'm not going to stick anything onto the bottom here. Okay, so those 4 are on there. Trick is to peel it without it being detached. There we go. It's better. Okay. And same as before, I'm going to feed the JST cable so that it goes inside the frame and goes all the way to the top. So there it is there, sticking out. Okay. And then this one, I'm going to poke it through there. And it seems like that's hitting slightly there. There we go. That's better. Okay. All right. So we've got all those pieces. Now let's plug in some of these JST cables here. So see the first one here. So these two are on this side here. And so I'm going to plug them in here. This is the -Y side. Line them up and plug them in. Just got to line them up correctly and then they push right in. It's just getting in the way here. Here we go. Just make sure they are pushed down all the way. Okay. And then here, this bottom one, this is coming all the way up from the bottom solar panel here, comes up the side, and we're going to plug that into the -Z. And there's only one solar panel there, so the other one is going to be empty. Okay. And then come around here to the +X, and here are the two +X solar panel JSTs connectors, and they are going to plug in here. That is one. And that is two. And again, we'll make sure all these wires go inside when we close it up, but for now it doesn't really matter. Okay. So now we are ready to do the top. So let me spin this around here. So the +X is facing the top. The two coax are here on the left. So here is the top, and it is going to basically go like this. And I'm going to need the hardware for the coax. So there's a washer and a nut for each of them. And there's also going to be the SMA rubber duck antenna there. Okay, so I'm going to bring this over here, flip it upside down, put it over here, and then I'm going to poke these SMA through. See how those are. And then once they're through, I can now put the washer and the nut so they don't fall out. And with these ones, I actually do usually nip these up with my pliers. That way the antennas end up straight. So I just tighten that slightly. There we go. Again, not super tight, but tight enough so that it's going to be straight. And I also want to take the JST connector that goes to this solar panel, and it's going to plug in. Oh, look at that. I did it on the wrong side there. That's interesting. Never done that before. I was trying to plug it in there, but it's already plugged in. So I'm going to unplug this one. By the way, unplugging JSTs is a little harder than plugging them in. You need to kind of brace your hand a bit here. There we go. So this is the minus, this is the plus Z, which is the top. So I'm going to plug that in there. And then this one here, I'm going to have to reroute here. Let's have a look. Here he is here. So I'm going to have to poke him through to the other side. Almost. There we go. Okay, so here I've poked it out the other side. And now we can come up the side here. And it can now plug into the minus Z side, which is where I should have plugged it in. There we go. Okay, so now we have all the solar panels plugged in except for the plus Y and the minus Y, which we're going to mount next. So I'm just going to kind of put this, put the top on, and in order to get it to go down, you see how the length of the coax there. So you basically just have to make the coax bend so that you can do this. I'm going to push it down so that it bends. There we go. So I'm just going to put that there. I'm not worried right now about these wires popping out because this is just a temporary hold here. Okay, so here's the side. So just throw a screw in here to hold it in place, even though I won't tighten it. Okay, that's better. So now I'm going to route the USB cable and the sound card because it needs to go inside. So, and you notice, see which side I'm on here. Here's the camera, and then this side here has the remove before flight switch there. So it's going to come over here, and then this is going to get inserted in here, and it just kind of sits on top here and goes all the way across to the other side there, like that. And we just need to make sure that it's not blocking. You might have to slip it, like, see how that I just poked that underneath there and there, and make sure that wire is out of the way. So like this will allow the last two solar panels on this side to go in like that. So that is what we're going to do next. So here, I'll just poke this out again so you can see how this goes. So I just poke it in here, free this cable up, and kind of goes diagonally like that. Okay. So let's do these side pieces here. Now, these are the ones that I recommend using the Velcro for, because if you want to take the frame apart, these two pieces are going to go separately. So I'm going to cut 3 small pieces of the Velcro. And the Velcro, these are a little harder to peel too. So you just have to be patient. But it is nice that you can easily undo the solar panels as you need them. Okay. So here I'm going to put one piece here. Second piece there. And for this, I actually am going to attach to the bottom because remember, it's Velcro, so it'll come undone. And if I just did the 2, it would not be as stable. So that's why I'm doing 3. Okay, so those are the 3 pieces. Now I just need to peel the top film. Okay, and I'm going to make sure that the wire here goes up, doesn't get in the way of anything. Line it up and stick it on there. There we go. So I will now do the top one. For this one, I'm only going to do 2 because we don't have the top attached yet. So it's a bit awkward. Okay. Now, peel the top film. Okay. And again, make sure that our cable is going up. Try to center them. And plug it in. There we go. Okay. So now let's do the same thing on the other side. So I'm going to cut three for this bottom solar panel. Okay, so those are the three. Okay. Run JST cable facing up. Plug it in. And then finally, two more pieces of Velcro. Okay. So final solar panel facing up. Line him up and plug him in. Okay, so that is all the solar panels attached. So I'm going to pop the lid off here. I did put one of these screws in to hold it. Get it out here. There we go. Okay, so now before we close the top here, we need to get all of the solar panels plugged in. I see it. I see an issue here. This cable here is hitting the back of the solar panel. So I'm going to pull it off to the side here. There we go. That's better. That will sit. That should sit more flat now. Okay. So these are the two JST connectors from here. So they're going to plug in here. So I'm going to do that. It's one. And there's two. And then same thing for over here. Here are the two JST connectors on this side. And just need to plug them in. here. And there. Okay. So they are all plugged in. And now all we have to do is just close the top here. And as we do that, we just need to make sure that all these wires don't poke outside. So we just need to kind of push them all inside the frame here. Oh, also, I think I had a nut pop out. Yeah, I had one of my nuts pop out. So let's fix that. See which one it is. Looks like it's this one. So I'm going to press the nut in. There we go. Pressed back in. Ready to go. And I'm just going to look at it here, make sure none of the wires are poking out. Oh, that looks pretty good. That looks pretty good. Looks like it's sticking it up a little bit here. Let's see what that is. Could be one of the wires was sitting onto the frame. There we go. That's better. I think that will work now. So now let's try putting the screws in. And again, I just want to get them to start. Don't want to tighten it up all the way yet. Okay, that is one. Okay, that is two. Three. Uh-oh, that might have been the sound of a nut popping out. No, that was good. You went in. But yeah, I think one of them did pop out. So in order to fix the one that popped out, I would just need to move it out so that it's there. Hopefully pop the solar panel off. Okay, so that is all of the solar panels attached. This one definitely need to tighten up. See, it's sticking out. Okay. And then the final step, we attach the SMA antennas. Okay. So here we have it. And we'll just give it a test here by taking out the remove before flight and seeing that it powers up. You probably also want to run some tests on your CubeSatSim. Oh, good. There we go. There is the green power light and the blue transmit LED coming on. So that's good. And again, we could, if we needed to get access to things, these side panels here are Velcro, and so they can be popped off like that in order to get to things, and they can be put back on again. The other ones can also be removed, but it's quite a bit harder to do so. Okay, so that completes the CubeSatSim Step 8.